Even those that have already graduated, rest up. You're not too cool to come up here. Come on up. All right. Come on in, have a seat, guys. It is so good to have you here. If you missed last week, we talked a lot about history, specifically the history of God's people in the ancient world, where they had some terrible things going on in ancient Egypt, where this wicked Pharaoh had done this terrible thing to God's people, and they're in need to be saved. They need to be delivered. And so I want to give you a little test this morning, but don't worry, it's a multiple choice test. So if you see the answer you think is correct, I want you to raise your hand, kids, okay? But keep in mind, you can answer more than one. So if more than one, you can raise your hand for. All right, so let's look at the question here, kids. If you were part of a group of people suffering as badly as the Israelites in ancient Egypt, who would you want as a deliverer? Are you ready? How many of you would like Superman to deliver you? Superman, yeah, a DC fan, good, yeah, all right. What about this next character, Spider-Man? How many of you would like Spider-Man to deliver you? No, we got some boos here. All right, how about this group, the Avengers? Oh, got a whole lot of love for the Avengers. What about this last one, a baby? Your face was priceless. Why does it seem so silly to ask God to provide a baby for you to deliver you? Do you think a baby's good at saving people? No. Why? Why would a baby not be a good option in this test? What do you think? What do you think? Yeah.
Because it's just little.
That's right. That's right. He's just a little baby. But what we're going to see in today's Bible passage is that baby's name is Moses. And he's exactly the right person that God is going to use to save and deliver his people from an evil, wicked king in Egypt. And so keep that in mind as we look at today's passage. Good job. I appreciate your participating, and I hope you got the answer right. Please grab a piece of candy before you return to your seats. If you attend preschool through first grade, you may head to rest up with your parents or grandparents. No pushing, there's enough candy for everybody. While the kids are getting themselves situated, please open up your Bibles to the book of Exodus chapter 2. If you don't have a Bible with you today, there's going to be one in the chairs in front of you. It will also be up on the screen in a few minutes. If you're a guest with us here today, thank you so much for joining us as we're on part 2 for our fall sermon series, working through the book of Exodus. And as we talked about last week, in modern secular history books, they often take God out of the equation because their focus is more about the actions and the achievements of individual people. But when it comes to the history book known as Exodus, this is not just talking about what people have done, but more importantly, pointing to the actions of God and how he always keeps his promises and is working out his plan of redemption for his people. Now, if you visited last week and you learned this terrible Pharaoh and how he created this law that any Hebrew baby boy that was born was to be executed by throwing into the river Nile, you would say, well, of course, the beginning of chapter 2 is God's people crying out for help, save us, this is terrible. But as we're going to see in this passage, it's not how the sequence of events worked. And so let's look at this. First, we're going to see how Moses is born. Next, that Moses is saved. Then, Moses is raised, of all places, in the royal court of Egypt. Then Moses flees to Midian, and only then, after a new Pharaoh took over in Egypt, did God's people cry out for deliverance. And so we need to wrestle with that. Because if you were suffering, if you were having a difficult time, wouldn't you think that then would be the appropriate time to cry out and not wait years and years later? And so what was going on in the hearts of God's people? Were they just kind of blind, or had they forgotten about their connection with God? Were they kind of waiting, okay, we just got to hang in there a little bit longer, and then when a new king comes in and a new regime takes over, that'll be so much better, and then we'll be fine. We don't know what was going on. But the most important thing we need to point out in this passage is not that God waited until his people to cry out. He didn't. He knew exactly what they needed. He knew the perfect person for the job. And long before they ever cried out for deliverance, God put in motion a series of events to bring the very perfect deliverer to save them. And so keep that in mind as we look at the birth of Moses, starting with chapter 2, verse 1. Now there was a man in the house of Levi who married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could not hide him any longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. She placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket along the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. But then his sister quickly asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse this baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. The girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him, and when the child grew older, she took him back to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Now she named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." One day, after Moses had all grown up, he went out to where his own people were, and he watched at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that to see no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now the next day he went out and he saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, saying, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Well, who are you? Are you the ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." And when the Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water from the troughs to water their flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses, he got up and came to their rescue, watering their flock. The girls returned to Ruel, their father, and said, "Well, why have you come so early today?" They answered, "Well, this Egyptian, he rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "Well, where is he?" he asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Now Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become an alien in a foreign land." Now during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So God looked on them, the Israelites, and was concerned about them. And so from a historical standpoint, you can see the importance of family ties. And this passage begins much like the last passage with just a bit of genealogy. Remember, this was primarily written at first for God's people to know where they came from. And so the house of Levi, the family of Levi, was important to God's people because later on they would be chosen for the important responsibility of leading worship in the tabernacle and then the temple. And the house of Levi was exactly the family for God's deliverer to come. But if you were Moses' mother, imagine your anxiety, imagine your fear, imagine your grief knowing that once again for the 3rd time you're pregnant. And now this law has come about where the Pharaoh said that if you were to give birth to a baby boy, he would be executed by being thrown into the Nile. Imagine that. Mothers, fathers, many of them who have baby boys here today, imagine the anxiety of week by week, month by month, as the baby's about to be born, and there's a 50-50 chance that if it's a boy, he's going to be executed. So imagine her grief when the boy was born. It says when she saw that he was a fine child. Now the Hebrew there is tov. And that word's important because that's the same word that God used when he was creating the heavens and the earth. He created the heavens and the earth, and what did he say? He saw that it was good. And so in this use, It's clear that we don't know how, we don't know why, but Moses' mother, when she looked at her son, she saw that there was something special about him. Not only was he healthy, but he was special. And breaking the law of the land, she chose to hide him for 3 months until he got so big she couldn't hide him at all. And in this amazing act of irony, she prepares a basket. Now the word there in Hebrew is the same for ark, as in Noah's ark. She prepares this ark, and of all places, she puts the baby in the ark, lays it in the Nile River, the same Nile River that 3 months earlier this little boy should have been executed in. And so she sends the sister to keep an eye on him during the day. And of all people in the world to come strolling around the riverbank, Pharaoh's daughter discovers the basket. And of all things, she looks down at this baby boy, and what does it say? He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. Now maybe this Egyptian princess didn't like the law that her father had made, thought it was too harsh, thought it was wrong, and so she had pity on this child. And so maybe she's sitting there thinking, wow, I know what my dad said, I have to kind of tip this basket over to drown this baby, but I don't know. And before she can make a decision, here comes Miriam running up. Oh, did you want me to go get a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby you found in the river? The lady says yes. She goes back and of all people gets the mother of Moses. Imagine the joy that you would find, that you could raise your child, that you could have 3 or 4 years in that tender time period where you're raising your son and you're spending time with him and get paid for it. Wouldn't that be nice if we got paid to be parents? That'd be nice. But we don't. At least we should. Some communities are trying to do that. But the point is that after 3 months, getting paid to raise her child, or 3 years rather, she brought the baby back to Pharaoh's daughter, verse 10, and she became her son. Now Pharaoh's daughter names him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. Now Moses is important because remember, when someone is given a name in the ancient world, it's not just what you're called. It's not just, hey you, and then your name. No. In the ancient world, your name also was wrapped up your identity, who you were, what you did. And so by the Pharaoh's daughter giving him the name Moses, there was great significance. And let me explain here. If you remember last week, we don't know for sure who the Pharaoh is in this text. It's about 1450 BC. Some scholars think it was Thutmose III. Isn't he a handsome Pharaoh here? Now when you think about his name, we see that in Egyptian the word Mose means born of. Therefore, Thutmose means born of Thut, the Egyptian god of knowledge. But maybe it wasn't Thutmose III. Maybe the Pharaoh at this time was his great-great-grandfather, Ahmose. Isn't he a good-looking? Kind of needs a nose job, though, right after a couple thousand years. Kind of looking scrappy there. But maybe it was this guy. Now, Ahmose means born of the Egyptian god of the moon. Now, why is that important? With that in mind, when Pharaoh's daughter named her new adopted Hebrew son Moses, while it is indeed similar, it sounds similar to the Hebrew word for drawn out, there is great significance there. And so I'm always hesitant to bring some scholarly stuff into the text here this morning, but I think this is really important. Listen to this. Look what I found. The significance is that when the child was named by this princess, the Egyptian word related to Mose was used, meaning something like child or born of. The name might have been even longer, perhaps having a divine name with it, child of some god. Perhaps the princess knew who the God of Moses was. But here's the point. The name's motivation came from the fact that she drew him from the Nile, the source of all of life in Egypt. But the sound of the name recalled for the Hebrews the verb to draw out in their own language. And so translating the words of the princess into Hebrew allowed for this effective wordplay to capture the significance of the story in the sound of the name. The implication for the Israelites is something to this effect, saying, well, you called him born one in your language and after your custom, but in our language that means drawn out, which is what was to become of him. You drew him out of the water, but he would later draw us out of Egypt through the water, of course referring to the Red Sea. So the circumstance of the story show that Moses is to be a man of destiny. And this naming episode summarizes how divine providence was at work in Israel. Imagine if your name had that much significance that when someone heard your name, all of this wonderful history came to mind. And if that was the end of the story, it'd be kind of nice, right? Moses gets to grow up of all places in the royal court. He had everything provided for him. He was trained in the very best ancient education institution in the whole world. And yet, when he was about 40, we know that from the book of Acts, one day, he was all grown up, he was around 40 years old, he decides, you know what, I really don't fit in with my Egyptian friends and my Egyptian family, so I'm going to go check on the Israelites, the Hebrew people. And so he's out wandering, and he saw their hard labor. He saw particularly an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So what did Moses have to do? He sees one of his own people being beaten, maybe beaten to the very inch of their life. I mean, if you saw a brother, a sister, a cousin, a grandma and grandpa being beaten, what would you do? Moses looks left and right, making sure no one was watching, and he kills the Egyptian. In order to protect life, he acts to deliver, and he hides the body in the sand. Now the next day he went on again. Now he's probably kind of feeling pretty good about himself, right? Inside his heart he knows that God has been preparing him from something, so maybe he had a little bit of swagger that next day. He's kind of walking around saying, yeah, don't mess with me. What does he see? This time it's two Hebrew people. It's kind of like one person was being a bully and picking on another one. And once again inside of him he's saying, well, this just isn't right. And he chews the guy out, the one that was in the wrong. He said, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? Because again, Moses is the deliverer, right? Not yet. First he's rejected by his people. The man says, well, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? And then it hits Moses. What he did has become known. Now his life is at risk. And sure enough, when the Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. And I can't help but wondering if that Pharaoh thought, man, I should have never let my daughter bring that Hebrew child into this. Look what he has done. And so he set out to kill Moses. But Moses fled. He fled to a distant land called Midian, where he sat down in the well. Imagine how Moses was feeling at that moment. He no longer had a family. He no longer had a land. He no longer had a place to live. He's in the middle of the desert, and he comes across this well. Now, in the ancient world, it was inappropriate for men to draw water out of the well for themselves. That was something the ladies were supposed to do. So while he's sitting by the well, these 7 daughters of a local Midian priest come up to gather water. That's what they did every day. And they probably came at a time where they were hoping that no one would be around. And so they see this Egyptian man here. And again, maybe he had like eye makeup, you know. Do you remember that Bengal song, Walk Like an Egyptian? Right? No? Okay. For your time. But probably had like makeup on it. Maybe he had like the Egyptian like outfits on, and they're kind of looking at them. Oh. As they're getting water, these shepherds, these rowdy ruffians come running in and attack the women. Okay? Perhaps they're trying to beat them or abuse them. And for the 3rd time in the text, Moses sees all of this. He says, no. I have to do something. And he came to the rescue. And not only that, even though he was a man and he was Egyptian, he got water for all of their flocks. Now when the girls returned home, the father said, well, what are you doing so quickly? What's going on? And they answered, well, this Egyptian, he rescued us from the shepherd. And then basically said, well, what are you doing? Where's the guy? This guy came to a rescue and you just left him sitting at the well? Invite him over. I need to say thank you. And because Moses has nowhere else to go, he agrees to stay with the man and gives his daughter Zipporah, Moses, in marriage. They, of course, give birth to a son. And now Moses has a chance to name him. He names him Gershom. And that's the name for foreign. And then it points out, for I have become an alien in a foreign land. Moses doesn't have a land anymore. He doesn't have a family. And yet the Lord's raising up a new family for him in this foreign land. So while all of this is going on, the passage ends with during that long period, the king of Egypt dies. A new Pharaoh takes over, and only then do the Israelites groan out in their slavery. They cry out for help, and those cries went up to God. And the word there for cry in Hebrew is the equivalent. Now this has never happened to me, and if it's ever happened to any of you, I'm sorry. But the word for crying out there is the excruciating pain that takes place if both of your arms are broken at the same time. Can you imagine how you would scream? Even the toughest guy in the room. It's not me, but Even the toughest guy in the room. If he had both of his arms broken at the same time, he'd be and screaming and yelling. And because of the suffering of God's people, they were crying out. They were groaning up into heaven, please, Lord, save us. And how does God respond? You see, there's 4 action words there. God heard them. God remembered them. It wasn't like he forgot. It wasn't like he was up on his throne and saying, what's that sound? Oh, I had forgotten about those Israelites. You silly Hebrews. What's going on down there? No. He was aware all along of what was going on. And he realized, yeah, I've made some promises. And as we saw, he had already put in motion to bring the deliverer. He looked on them, and then the last one is he was concerned. And in Hebrew, that word is yada. God knew them. And that's significant because it means that God, even before they had cried out for help, they knew they needed help. Because he had looked into their hearts. And in my morning prayer, did you notice I always, every single Sunday, ask the Lord to seek our hearts. And if someone has come here today and is overwhelmed or depressed, God knows how you're feeling. God knows what you need before you can even ask for it. And we see that at the end of this passage, God knew that they needed a deliverer. And when you think about who Moses is, I mean, he's a fantastic guy. Not perfect, as none of us are, but he really does do some amazing things. And so next week we're going to see what it was like when God revealed himself to Moses at something called the burning bush, and how he gave Moses a formal call into ministry. But if we saw in this passage over and over and over again, actually 3 times, God was already using out these circumstances, as amazing as they are, to form him for ministry. And we see that he has this heart where it's very clear that he needs to come to people's defense, and he needs to rescue the weak and the people that are being bullied. First, right, when the slave owner was smacking that Hebrew up to the inch of his life, he came into the rescue. Then when the 2 Hebrews were fighting and one Hebrew was being a bully, he came to his rescue. And then those 3 daughters of Zipporah, he once again came to the rescue. That's who he is. But even though that's who he is, he only points to an even greater deliverer. And as we think about that, let's go back to the children's sermon a minute. Okay? I know I looked at some of the adults and you felt a little bit left out. Okay? So we're going to close today with a multiple choice test for all of you. Okay? Feel free to raise your hand more than once. There is a correct answer, but if you want to raise your hand more than once, you may do so. So here's the question. If you were part of a group of people who were suffering under great oppression, who would you ask God to send as a deliverer? Okay. Would you send the army? Army. We've got a few army folks here with us today. Thank you for your service. All right. How about the Navy? Yes. Navy. We got Navy parents here today. Absolutely. All right. How about the Air Force? Any love for the Air Force? John Rose got yes. Love for the Air Force. All right. How about a baby in a manger? Oh, come on. Everybody's hand needs to be up. Everybody, come on. That's the right answer. Because we understand who that baby in the manger was. We can't forget our history. And remember when the angel of the Lord appeared to a man named Joseph, this is what he said. Your wife Mary will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Why is that important? Because in the name of Jesus means he who saves. As I mentioned last week, as amazing of a leader that Moses was to become, he only foreshadows the great deliverer, who like baby Moses came to us as a baby, not in a basket of reeds along the Nile in Egypt, but rather in a manger in Bethlehem. Moses would come to point out our need for an even greater deliverer. Since all of humanity suffers under the oppression of sin and death, you and I, we needed a perfect deliverer to come and defeat those chains that bind us. And so as we think about this series, it's important, okay? Because we too have been adopted into God's family. And that's why we could still sing songs like Father Abraham had many sons. And I am one of them. So are you. And so when we read Exodus, this isn't just for ancient people. This is our history too. Because we know that all of these amazing events all point to our need for a deliverer. And it's not just something that we've done in the past, and yes, I've accepted Christ in the past, something maybe we're going to do today, but it's every day, every moment we come to see our need for a deliverer. It isn't some distant thing, well, I'll come to know Christ later on when I really need him. No. Right in this moment, we need a deliverer, because there's still areas of our life that still need to be changed and fixed, and there's still chains that bind us. And the blessing that we have that those in ancient Egypt didn't, we know his name, and his name is Jesus. Please pray with me. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this amazing story. Just tremendous the way that you worked out all these different sets of circumstances. And before God's people ever cried out to you, you knew that they needed a Savior. And you sent, of all people, not a superhero, but a baby in an ark in the Nile River. And Lord, as we're going to see in the next coming weeks and months, that Moses was an amazing leader, but Lord, he only points to the great deliverer. And Lord, we thankfully know your name is Jesus, and it's in your name we pray. Amen.